I am going there. Kind of. Could Mercedes, instead of George Russell, loan Kimi Antonelli out to make room for Max Verstappen? To Alpine, of all places. Look, I want to appease the YouTube machine, but also give you something fresh on this really oversaturated topic, so here you go. I can already hear you sharpening the knives and prepping diabolical comments, but do hear me out here. Kimi Antonelli is fantastic for Formula 1, and he has proven himself immensely in my book. But let's be real, I am not Toto Wolff, even though I do try to sound like Toto with the accent. Besides, this would only work if Mercedes lands Max Verstappen and Alpine would agree to maybe a 1 or 2 season loan to ease in the new engine. Bottas would be a safer stopgap, reportedly in the mix, but he offers little for Mercedes' long-term vision. Without that perfect storm, expect Pierre and Franco to stay put next year at the Team Enston operation. It's a bit of a bind, this topic, you see. But I am also understanding that many of you are absolutely sick to death with this topic. Your expression probably mirroring what Max Verstappen's was. Look at him, he's just done. So, to appease the machines and give you a slightly fresh take, let's focus on where Kimi lays in all of this. Because he's been relatively quiet, and how shipping him off to another team in order to keep them on the grid, and within the sphere of influence of Mercedes, isn't a precedent. Although having said that, putting Kimi out on loan after spending his rookie year inside the works team is a bit of a first for Toto. Because on the surface, you'd be thinking, why on earth would Toto kick him out of the works team considering the rookie season that he's had? He scored over 60 points at the halfway mark of the season, with a pole in the sprint at Miami and a podium to his name. And that wasn't a lucky podium. That was a well-earned, hard-fought podium as well. There's clearly a future for this kid in Formula 1, and I am excited to see where it goes. Spanner people, this is making it clear, it is spanner speculation time, so disclaimer. That might still not be enough for Kimi to remain with the works team for at least a couple of years, not until maybe he finds his feet and has matured a little bit. Because admittedly, the last few races have been peppered with mistakes, poor reliability, and a general cooling down in regards to scrutiny. Perhaps that might be since he will most likely be around for a while, there's no need to keep hounding him or microanalyzing him. The hype has kind of backed off a bit. Nevertheless, Wolff and Mercedes have utilised their customer teams before to provide their junior talent sanctuary, when the main lineup locked itself in. Folks, may I present to you Manor Racing of 2016, that effectively being the Mercedes B team, in that come the midway point of 2016, not only had that team taken on the Mercedes Junior Pascal Wehrlein, halfway through the season replacing Rio Haryanto, Esteban Ocon came on the scene. And then Esteban Ocon got onto Force India, then he got kicked out for Lance Stroll, and then he went over to Renault. This is not often talked about, but Renault blocked any chance of a recall for Esteban, so his hands were tied. That's why Esteban's technically not a Mercedes driver anymore, although technically he is, since he is still managed by Mercedes representatives, and besides, he's over at Haas having a whale of a time, so that's the end of that chapter. Wait, look, I'm getting really confused. Why would Antonelli or Bottas or any Mercedes driver that has association with Toto go to Alpine of all places? Well, it's all to do with the golden hello. Antonelli would be heading over to Alpine with absolutely fresh off the presses knowledge about where the regulation cycle is going with the Mercedes power unit, which everyone up and down the grid is speculating and presuming will be the best power unit on the grid out of the gate. And also taking fresh factory know-how with him. And that know-how matches Alpine's desire to just get rid of their own engine programs, saving tens of millions of dollars in the process, and taking on Mercedes' power unit as a customer team for 2026 and beyond. And they will also gain a dramatic and instant boost in performance, since the Renault is by far the weakest engine out there, but it also forces a complete philosophical reset. It really also doesn't help that the Renault group has got a bit of a power vacuum at the moment, and Flavio Briatore is effectively free to do what he wants. Yes, they don't have to make engines from scratch anymore, but they would ideally like to have people and drivers that would know how to fine-tune it and, repair it. Putting Kimi at Enston accelerates Alpine's engine learning and gives Mercedes a rare unrestricted customer data stream. Something they're unlikely to get from McLaren or Williams these days since, well, they've got their own ideas. Toto's options are therefore limited, whereas with Alpine, oh, no, this is amazing. Because at this moment, Alpine's reputation is in the dirt. They will be happy, most likely, to just bend over backwards and say, "Take me, Toto, take me! We will do anything to be competitive. We are ready, therefore, to receive." With George Russell diverting from the script for a brief moment not that long ago, saying that there are discussions going on with a Dutchman of some description at the moment, then of course the Italian bombshell not that long ago claiming that the deal was almost over the line, there is something going on which Wolff will hopefully reveal to the world that will be the best of all three worlds. But in my own honest opinion, Toto should just simply own the mistake that he made in the second season of him being team principal of Mercedes. He simply let Max get away. End of. He built a junior program, so that means he could then nurture his own talents, which is then manifested in George and Kimi. They're the current lineup. This is a ringing endorsement of the achievements and the efforts that he put in a decade ago. They've now borne fruit, and very impressive fruit at that. Just leave Max alone, Toto, please. Let him decide to do whatever the heck he wants. Because yes, Mercedes do have a lot to offer, potentially, as, of course, people think that they will have the strongest car in 2026 at the very least, and Max is looking to be racing in the best car, which right now, Red Bull isn't. And next year is not really giving us good signs that Red Bull will have a strong car instantly, because there are a lot of brand new things. They are very much in a transformative state at the moment. So yes, Max could dominate in a Mercedes, akin to what he was able to do in 2023, but in that same Sky Italia report that was doing the rounds, the board was having some misgivings with putting Verstappen in, because is it really necessary for the potential outlay they would have to fork out, since drivers are not withholden in the cost cap, so Mercedes could spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get this deal, where if they have the best car, if you just have George and Kimi in, they would be relative peanuts, and they would still be contesting for the World Championship. Kimi would certainly rack up a few race wins along the way in his sophomore season, and you would have the perfect story, and therefore, I'm pretty sure that a lot more people will be willing to sign the dotted line as part of the Mercedes junior team. Both of these achievements done with pure homegrown talent. However, the Max factor is a very powerful force, as you can probably tell. Because not only does Toto have the opportunity to correct one of the biggest mistakes of his career, he also has a real, viable and satisfying opportunity to send Red Bull and Christian Horner off to the Shadow Realm for good. Or at least for a few years until they can regroup. You know, and change their fudging car. And then Toto's ego is further massaged when his buddy Zach Brown gets in on the act via ESPN, stating to the world that Max and the Mercedes would be a bit scary and would be pretty serious competition. To elicit such a response from the current top banana team of McLaren, that would be music to Toto's ears. That's only going to massage his ego even more. But back to Kimi. The risk is obvious, as was the case with Ocon. And as we have witnessed also with Flavio Briatore's formidable and expensive acquisition of Franco Colapinto from Williams, he is looking for talent in which to secure a long-term deal and to develop. Because let's not forget, Alpine's deal with Franco, it's a 5-year deal of any capacity. I think that's been forgotten in recent times and maybe blinkered by the 5-race deal, which of course has been extended to an indefinite amount of time. And you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, Law, what about Pierre Gasly in all of this? That is very true. He does have a contract for next year, and there are no real signs that he is about to be dropped. But at the same time, as we have seen since Flavio Briatore arrived on the scene as effectively the top banana of Alpine, he and Gasly don't exactly get on like a house on fire. They do not see eye to eye. There have been various reports that Pierre's way of doing things rubs Flavio up the wrong way, and that there have been instances where there have been flashpoints, especially with Gasly pleading, begging Alpine to focus on next year to give him a chance of a competitive car. In short, Gasly and Briatore's relationship, it can turn on a centime race by race. So if this deal is struck and we have either an Antonelli-Colapinto lineup for 2026 or an Antonelli Gasly lineup and Colapinto sent back to the reserve role for a year or two, Toto has to write this contract carefully, because Briatore could easily come up with something where Alpine could refuse any recall option and therefore lock Kimi in forever. And then there's George to consider, because he believes that he's going to be staying, that the chances of him leaving are actually quite extremely low, and that it all depends on what Toto is able to negotiate with Verstappen's camp. So therefore, Kimi's future is also a bit fluid. But let me assure you, if you're starting to get a little bit fidgety or concerned, there is no way that Toto Wolff views Kimi Antonelli as disposable. Absolutely not. Say what you will about Toto, but his past actions have been geared toward ensuring his drivers have somewhere to go. The situation would be contractual and strategic, not personal. Antonelli has done more than enough to remain in F1 for a good few years. Why would you get rid of him point blank? You might be wondering why Toto can't just ship Bottas off to Enston to sign off his career. Well, the Finnish driver really doesn't provide as much leverage in this context. In my mind, he would be better suited in helping getting Cadillac off of the ground, and it would provide him a lot more opportunity and freedom, and not to mention Valtteri does have some recent experience with Ferrari power units. That certainly helps too. But yes, on paper, Bottas to Alpine seems like a done deal, like an easy one. But Mercedes does pay at a hidden price. He's their most experienced sim driver during a critical development window, and unlike Antonelli, Bottas hasn't raced a full-blown Mercedes F1 car in a Grand Prix for 4 years. His input today is second-hand. Valuable, yes, but not future-proof. Data flow from him would be therefore second-hand, but then also as a side note, if Franco does remain within the Alpine fold, be it as a reserve or a racing driver, if Gasly's the one to get the boot, then in a way, Franco would benefit from this as well, since he also has experience with Mercedes power units with his time at Williams. So having that extra intel from the works team, Franco already knowing what a Mercedes engine is like, you could easily see Colapinto having a massive upswing if he remains in F1 for 2026. And Kimi's direct knowledge of Mercedes right now, and him being right at the beginning of his career, it would be a massive perk for Alpine as well. And especially if Mercedes also provides some extra plums for Alpine to take the kid on. Because if they follow the same model that Ferrari did with the likes of Mick Schumacher and Oliver Behrman and what have you, and Zhou Guanyu, then there might be some little add-ons or kickbacks or subsidies that could be afforded to Alpine. And as we know, Flavio is one of the biggest bean counters out there. That was one of the reasons why Luca De Meo and the Renault Group took him on, to try and save money for potentially a buyout from another entity, which obviously has folded through because high-tech is no more in that regard. Perhaps maybe they could negotiate Mercedes Alpine some kind of power unit discount, or paying half or a decent chunk of Antonelli's salary for 2026, or however he longs to stay there. Money would be saved if they took on a Mercedes-associated driver. And also, Alpine is really in a funk right now. They are last in the constructors. They have no leverage whatsoever to be able to push back and say, well, if you take on Kimi, then you keep it forever, and therefore you cannot take it back, because we are so good. Because, no, they are not Renault where they were in 2019, where they were P4, P5. They were a really good, solid midfield team in comparison to where they are now. No, Toto would just laugh him out the door. Briatore will take him on without question and just make do with him with the time that they would have. Make hay while the sun shines. And this Alpine deal would also somewhat remain in step with something that Toto said not that long ago in regards to the 3-year plan that he has for Antonelli. According to this piece from F1i.com, Wolff lays out a 3-year path for Antonelli, a sign that he is not going to be giving up on the Italian anytime soon. He's also urging people to have patience with the teenager as he adapts to tire management, circuit knowledge, and racecraft. Now, even though you could easily argue that Mercedes would surely want some stability in regards to its younger drivers, we are entering a really uncertain time period at the moment where Mercedes has a really golden opportunity to take on Max Verstappen. Toto, again, having a chance to correct one of his biggest career errors, and therefore bring in Verstappen when he's reached his prime, and Max would be able to drive a very strong car again. This is unprecedented, folks, and one of the Mercedes drivers currently might have to take the brunt. But there might be a chance it could be Kimi as well. Not that I personally want it, I am just theorising a potential scenario which has been floated around the internet. And besides, if people are going to be talking about this, we may as well offer something new or relatively unspoken. Year 1 of the programme is, right now, the current rookie season, inside the works team where everything can be monitored, and Kimi's initial foray in F1 with outgoing regulations can be understood. In a Mercedes car which isn't gunning for championships, and therefore there's less pressure, Year 2 could unfold at Alpine if Mercedes lands Max Verstappen and needs to keep Antonelli racing while freeing up its own cockpit to chase a restoration of glory it's not had in a few years. Full season elsewhere, you may be thinking, well, that's not exactly stability and continuity that Wolff would ideally want. Well, in a way, it would sort of be continuity, because I think any deal that Wolff would strike with Alpine would make it clear that he is still a Mercedes driver, and if anything were to happen between Russell and Verstappen, Kimi can be called back like that. Alpine are making use of a very good talent for the future, but he is not theirs to play with. And he would also be working with the same power unit every weekend, so should the time come when Kimi does go back to Mercedes, it would be fitting in like a glove. And he would also be coming back a much more experienced driver, ready to take on the team leadership role should Max Verstappen continue to retire anyway, or George Russell have moved on. And again, Flavio will gladly comply, as it makes Alpine out to be a positive influence for F1 after years of the team being dragged through the mud. The article also shows that Wolff will resist short-term swaps, which means any Alpine deal must cover the whole 2026 campaign at least, and include a clear route back to Brackley for year 3 or year 4. Alpine simply just can't drop him whenever they feel like. And also, don't forget what Toto said not that long ago as well, that he is expecting full compliance from whoever drives within Mercedes, that he treats his drivers like anyone within the operation, even the person who makes the tea. That if they're not in step with the way Mercedes does things, he will come down on either George or Max ruthlessly. And that might mean that he might just simply kick him out at the end of the season, which will mean that Kimi can just step right back in there again. I don't think we are going to be seeing a repeat of 2016, because Toto, he won't be having any of that. And it therefore builds a really good, strong technical partnership with Alpine, who is going to be powered by Mercedes for the rest of the decade, getting off to a good start. And also a team that would be willing to take on a Mercedes Junior, unlike, again, Williams and McLaren. They're doing their own thing. And also, nothing in that piece changes the prospects of Valtteri Bottas in this situation. His one-year reserve contract lets him walk to Alpine outright, but Mercedes would then lose its most experienced simulator hand during next year's power unit rollout and development, because remember, the power units can be developed again after years of a freeze. Therefore, I think Wolff would prefer to keep Valtteri in-house if he doesn't get a deal with Cadillac, and send Antonelli only if the Verstappen move becomes a reality. In short, the F1i piece regarding the 3-year plan for Kimi, the lone idea isn't killed by that, it's still framed by that. Any spell at Alpine, be it 1 year or 2 years or what have you, would be the middle phase of Kimi's ultimate development that will probably see him through all the way through to his mid to late 30s. Let's not forget, this kid is 18 going on 19, and he has already shown what he is capable of, getting a podium and a pole. Yes, it was in a sprint, but it's still a pole. There is still clearly a lot of upside to this kid, and Mercedes knows exactly what he can do within the works operation, so it is probably going to be quite clear that if he is shepherded out to another team to gain some more experience away from the spotlight that little bit more, because, yeah, Mercedes are second place in the constructors, so therefore there is a lot of pressure and attention on them. So maybe Toto wants him to just be away from that just that little bit more to really hone himself, find his feet 100%, and then by the time he is ready to come back to Mercedes, he is the fully formed article, ready to put up with any kind of pressure. The article also reinforces why Bottas is less suited to the same move, because he sits outside that long-term strategy that Alpine would be wanting, and his departure would hurt Mercedes more than it would help. Also, Toto talks about the need to work the tyres properly, to fully understand them, in which Kimi may need time to fully perfect that, much like how Oscar has only now just gotten world-class understanding of tyre modulation, where that old weakness has now been cast to history. In short, whilst Wolff adores Antonelli and sees him as the future, the desire for success once more is an even bigger adoration. Because if there is one thing where Russell simply outclasses Antonelli at the moment, it's tyre management. George is becoming a little bit of a tyre whisperer, and also being able to drag that car into the top 5 consistently, which is why he is looking likely to take over Max Verstappen's role as P3 driver and being best of the rest. So yeah, George does know his way around the rubber. Wait, then there's also the academy angle to take into consideration, because right now, both drivers at Mercedes come from that junior team. They can say with pride that, yes, you can make it to Formula 1, just look at our lineup, and look what they're able to do. But what do they do next? They've got to do something with this, so there is a little bit of a 50-50 chance that the future of this junior team could be compromised in a way. But removing either of them to make room for Max Verstappen, an outsider, could hurt that message. Unless any kind of a loan deal ultimately proves to be part of a structured plan, not simply a downgrade to make way for a 4-time world champion who, again, had nothing to do with Mercedes. Loaning Kimi to Alpine would advertise that its graduates are race-ready, even when the works car is full. Yet the fine print has to be immaculate. A poorly written contract or a bad year at Alpine would be terrible for anyone within the program. The head honchos would look like they don't know what they're doing with potentially their future. But the upside would be immense and could guarantee a really good steady flow of recruits that Mercedes can call upon for many decades to come. That if they frame that this move to Alpine is part of the plan which will ultimately see Kimi back in a Mercedes in a couple of years' time, a much more polished article, away from the spotlight where he can refine himself without pressure from the media, then this will be a really good sign that not only could they continue to develop a driver once they get into Formula 1, but also a sign that, yes, well, don't you worry, if you can't get a place in Mercedes, I can put you at any team that I want. That the works team doesn't have to be the only port of call. But if the deal is written cap-handedly, and Alpine is free potentially via their legal team to keep Antonelli, or if Kimi simply doesn't want to go back to Mercedes because he likes where he is right now, then that would be absolutely horrendous. And it would be even worse if Antonelli ultimately ends up stagnating there. The move to there would look like just a stopgap, as in, oh, Kimi was a nuisance, so we're just shepherding him off there because it's convenient. Critics will then say that Mercedes locks their drivers into contracts they cannot escape, and that they are doomed to be spending the rest of their careers in mediocrity, or even losing their place in F1 altogether. The ultimate outcome hinges not on the loan itself, but in the way it's executed and communicated to all parties. And then, can you see how complex this is, folks? I'm trying to find a fresh angle on this. It all depends on Verstappen's appetite to move, and the appetite also of how much risk Mercedes is wishing to take. If Toto Wolff senses an opportunity to restore the glory from the good old days, to have the ultimate lineup and brag about it non-stop, then having George Russell and Max Verstappen in his team, yeah, they would be his guys, much like it was with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. And maybe Max might want to have something different for this next and probably final phase of his Formula 1 career. Maybe he might want to be a mentor figure, instead of just being the top guy, and then whoever's next to him, well, he doesn't mind who's next to him, but he doesn't really give much of a thought. Because Max does have a soft spot for Kimi. Because look back to when the F2 rumours first linked the Italian to F1 for 2025, Max offered detailed advice on learning tyre management and coping with mistakes, stressing that talent will show through if the driver stays relaxed. I think it's safe to say that Verstappen will not put up with anyone writing off rookies, be it Kimi, Gabi, Isaac, or anyone else. Something of which he was subjected to immensely back when he was finding his feet in the sport, 2018 being the peak of said criticism. Crash Stappen, anyone? So yes, the Alpine theory could easily fall apart if Max Verstappen does not wish this to happen. If Max basically says to Toto, oh yeah mate, I'll come over, but Kimi has to be my teammate, then yeah, Alpine would have to make do with Valtteri Bottas if he wants to have any connection with a Mercedes driver. Well, wait a minute, couldn't George go to Alpine? Oh, give over. George is not going to Alpine. If he were to go anywhere else, he would probably go to Aston Martin. Because yes, if in these negotiations the Dutchman makes it clear that he might want to have Antonelli as his teammate and perhaps give him a few more pointers before he then personally retires after having maybe secured one more championship with Mercedes, then I think Toto would be powerless to resist. And hey, if it ultimately proves to be all for naught and Verstappen remains with Red Bull, then Toto will just keep Kimi and George together and the 3-year plan would still go on uninterrupted. And if the Mercedes board do have a point and they end up with the fastest car anyway, then Kimi could easily be P2, P3 in his second season. And hey, it also has something to do with the exit clauses, because reportedly, there may be a huge buyout figure if Max simply wants to walk regardless of whatever clauses there are. Reportedly, $100 million it would cost for Max to remove himself from his contract if he hasn't had any of the clauses broken. Yeesh! The ultimate decision, though, will signal whether Mercedes values harmony around a new superstar above the strategic upside of embedding its protege inside a key engine part. And speaking of harmony, Williams started off with plenty of that, but the reality has bitten back hard with many instances of poor reliability and drivers despairing publicly. To find out why I personally think the team might have gotten a little bit ahead of themselves in their best season in years, watch this video next, straight after this one.